We are live.
Live.
Do you want to take us in?
Yeah.
All right.
So I'm Felicia, owner and registered dietitian at Paraz Nutrition. This is the My RD Journey podcast. So if you're on the ParazNutrition.com website, you could find 4 dietitians section, which is the My RD Journey.
Cheers. I'm Adam, producer, in-house, as it goes. I'm also Felicia's husband.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, some folks. Felicia was recently previewed or what do you call it? You were featured on another podcast.
Oh, yeah. I joined another podcast to chat. That was really fun.
Yeah. What's the name of the podcast?
The PATH podcast, the Positive Approaches to Health. So
cool.
that should be coming out. Yeah.
Link in the description to, I guess, their podcast. They don't do videos.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, we'll link in the show notes to their podcast. You had a good experience, right?
Yeah, 2 really great dietitians. So that was really fun. And they're not in the same state either. So that was cool just to kind of connect with people around the United States. So
sounds good. So we are getting into the stages 5 and 6 of the Transtheoretical Model. This is part 3 of a 3-part series. If you haven't listened to or watched the first 2 parts of this series, I encourage you to check them out. You don't need to watch them first, do you? Should you, I guess?
I mean, to understand this part, no, because,
We'll do a quick recap of the first 4 stages, but I will link the other 2 parts in the description as well as cards here if you're watching on YouTube. So do we want to just do a quick recap? We are talking about stages 5 and 6. This is the Transtheoretical Model. It is a 6-part theory of the stages of change.
Yes. And basically this explains how people change their behaviors over time. And so there's this series of stages. So the first is pre-contemplation, where someone's not necessarily thinking about change or not aware that they need to change. Contemplation, where someone is thinking about it, but they're kind of on the fence. They're ambivalent. They have pros and cons that are kind of equal. Preparation, where someone is getting ready to make the change, and maybe in about 30 days. So they're getting all the things together. Action, where people are doing it. So they're in it. And then now we've gotten to maintenance, which is the 5th stage that we're going to talk about today.
And that's what we'll be getting into.
Yes. And then termination, which there's some that recognize the termination stage and some that kind of lump it together with maintenance. So
it is an optional 6th stage. That's great. Well, okay. I think we covered our recap there pretty well. Pre-contemplation, contemplation. So pre-contemplation being what's the saying for pre-contemplation?
I can't.
That's what your client will be saying if they are pre-contemplation. And
I can't do it. I won't do it. Yeah.
And contemplation?
Oh, contemplation is I may.
And then preparation?
I will.
And then action?
I am.
Okay.
And
great.
Then maintenance is I still am.
So I still am. So all right, let's jump into it. Maintenance. What are the characteristics for this stage? How do you know someone is in maintenance?
So generally, once someone hits the maintenance stage, they've been actively doing whatever their change is for the last 6 months. And that's, we're using time frames here, and we talked before about time frames and how they might not be a thing, but generally speaking, about 6 months, people have been doing whatever the change is. So they've been exercising consistently for 6 months. They've been eating, 2 cups of vegetables per day for 6 months.
Who does that? That's insane.
I do.
Anyone but you.
So they're still doing it. So I still am is like the phrasing that they would use. They're usually very confident in what they're doing. They are maybe tweaking their goals along the way too to make it more challenging. So they're still kind of progressing in a sense, but they are really confident and feeling good about what they're doing as well.
Great. So with clients, they are saying, I still am?
Yep. So I still am exercising. I still am eating well. I still am cooking at home or whatever it might be.
And, is the maintenance stage a hard and fast line? Are people still sometimes dipping into preparation and action if they're changing things? Are they rolling with new things sometimes while they're maintaining other things? It seems like it's kind of a fluid state to be in.
It is. And kind of the whole model is in a sense a fluid fluid
approach.
Yeah. So, people don't necessarily get to maintenance and necessarily stay in it. They may actually what's called lapse or relapse. So in lapsing, they may go back to an old behavior briefly and then return back to exactly what they were doing, or they might relapse back through all the stages. And that's not something, that's it's a natural part of behavior change. So.
And I imagine that some people get to the maintenance stage with something like, their diet, but with exercise or sleep patterns or other things with managing stress, they may be in different stages of this. And that's kind of in your wheelhouse still as a dietitian, I would assume.
Yeah, so that covers under like the wellness, and if anyone's ever seen what's called like the wellness wheel, and there's it's really cool though because there's a lot of approaches to it where you like fill in these little bubbles to say like where you are in your wellness journey, and you like see how well the wheel rolls. So
is there a graphic for this wellness wheel?
Yeah,
that I can show.
Yeah, we can put it in and then link it down below.
I'll show the wellness wheel if I can find a picture.
Yeah, I'll send you one. But yeah, there's a lot of stages. We're talking about stages. There's a lot of components to the wellness, and so financial. There's also aspects of like financial, emotional, the stress aspect, but some of them have broad categories, and then some of them are broken down. But nutrition, obviously, physical activity, those kinds of things. Spiritual wellness is also in there as well. So
it's possible to be at one stage in the wellness wheel for a certain thing, and another stage for a different part of the wellness wheel.
Yeah.
Some of these things may be a bit outside of the scope of a dietitian, I
guess.
I
mean, in depth, we talk about stress because, stress can trigger, someone to overeat or undereat too. And so it's something we still kind of have to talk about some things in a sense, to be able to kind of explore the food aspect and all of that. But, and one thing just, you mentioned that, someone could be in different stages with different things. And that's kind of the whole thing, is that most people aren't seeing me for one thing. And, your human body, everything interacts with one another. So it's, it's hard to, separate things where it's, I'm eating more vegetables, but also trying to exercise. And then I'm also stressed. And now the holidays are coming up, and there's usually a lot of things that are kind of happening all at once. So absolutely, someone can be kind of in different places.
Well, a lot of these things affect one another. If you get poor sleep, you're more likely to overeat the next day, stuff like that. If you're stressed, you're more likely to get less or worse sleep. It all affects one another. It makes sense to have a cohesive approach. That wellness wheel sounds pretty cool. I've probably seen it before, and I can't remember what it looks like, but that makes sense. So you could be in the maintenance stage for certain things in the wheel, and in preparation or action or whatever else for other things on your wellness wheel. So what kind of experiences do you typically have with clients that are in maintenance? What's your typical experience with a client who's currently in the maintenance stage?
So a lot of times when I'm working with clients and they're in maintenance, what we're really focusing on is keeping up with what's called self-monitoring, which would be basically...
Self-monitoring?
Yeah. So they're monitoring their behavior. So this could be through tracking in a sense. And, we kind of highlighted food tracking in the last episode, but this could be just like checking off on a calendar the days they go to the gym, or it could be like checking off, or creating a menu and posting it on the fridge for the week. So it could be like those kinds of things, but any kind of thing where they're tracking in a sense. But this can be really helpful here, because often when I have clients in maintenance, there's a high chance for them to what's called relapse or lapse. So lapse would be kind of going back briefly, but then returning to where they were, or relapse where they would cycle back through previous stages. And this is usually triggered by like stress, boredom, or a family event, or the holidays, which we have coming up. So that can be a huge piece there. And not to jump us too far ahead, but that's kind of a stark difference between maintenance and the termination. Because maintenance, there's that still temptation, to say the least, whereas termination, there'd be no temptation to return to previous behaviors.
The word termination is kind of doom and gloom, too.
It is a little bit.
So, but let's stick with maintenance for a little bit here. So you're essentially labeling self-monitoring as tracking.
Yeah.
Any method of tracking. Is there anything else you would consider self-monitoring?
You can also, it's all kind of down to tracking in a sense, but it doesn't have to be necessarily so formal, as in like I'm writing what I ate for the day. I have clients who track or identify, they keep like a food journal about their mood and what things worked well. So it doesn't have to be negative of things that they're not doing well or what they missed, but even like, here's a recipe that went really well, or they start keeping like a binder full of all the recipes they've tried. So it's still just kind of bringing a level of awareness to what they're doing.
Yeah, awareness seems like a really good term for that. It seems like it's sort of an approach to keep them aware of what they're doing and what works and maybe what doesn't. I could see journaling being a part of that too. The recipe book would be an awesome idea. Any kind of app to keep track of what you're doing and how you've been doing with it.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really great way to go. That's probably a really important component of maintenance, I would assume.
Yeah. And, sometimes people get so far into like doing all the things, and then they get to maintenance and they're doing it well. And then they're like, well, I feel like I'm kind of in a rut. And so being able to kind of consistently challenge themselves or go back to things that worked well for them before. And that especially is true for honestly like the cooking part and the recipes. Like I have clients who will start trying new recipes and they like this one, they like that one. And then they get to a point where they're like, I don't know what to make next. And here they've made like 50 different recipes. And so being able to like have like a binder or something, you know, where they can go back and say like, oh, that was a good one that I tried a month ago. I would, you know, make that again. And so it keeps that excitement, but it gives them that possibility of different things to try.
Yeah, I think people can go a little crazy with recipes if you don't need a new recipe for every day of the year. I mean, you look at a restaurant menu, it's only got, dozens of items, not hundreds. Imagine if you had hundreds of dishes on a restaurant menu, what would you pick? It's impossible to keep that kind of catalog.
It's funny because I have a lot of clients who have, they just become recipe hoarders. And so they'll save, oh my gosh, they'll save so many on their phone. And actually, you know, sometimes I have clients who prefer to print or write them out because if not, they've like saved a bunch of recipes and they're like, I haven't actually tried any of them, but I keep trying ones that look like saving ones that look good. And so sometimes being able to like, you know, write it out into a new small, it doesn't have to be like a huge binder, but a small little notebook or something like that. And that can sometimes, you know, one, narrow down the amount of recipes and not make it feel so overwhelming when you're like, oh, what do I make? So that could be nice.
Yeah, I think in terms of recipes and keeping a good variety, I think a smart way to do it is to get a handful of recipes for a handful of different categories of dish.
Yes.
So have a 4 or 5 different soups you like making, have 4 or 5 different stews or crock pot meals you like making, have 4 or 5 different things you like to bake in maybe a casserole dish, and so on. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. Something on the stovetop, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, like categorize them. Yeah.
Yeah, and that way you're not going insane where you need to remember like all these, a lot of things that really don't matter with, I don't know. I spent a lot of time doing catering and cooking. So it's just a bit of a pet issue for me, but let's not dig too deep into that. So we talked about self-monitoring. Now the next stage is termination. So in my impression, is it bad to just stay in maintenance forever?
No, and that's where, you know, some people don't necessarily think of a 6th stage of being termination because maintenance is you're maintaining what your behavior, you know, you're maintaining and you're doing it. And it's consistent and, you know, it's part of what you're doing. And so that's why some people, if you look at some of the stages of change and people who talk about them, they don't necessarily say there's this 6th termination stage. They just kind of leave it at maintenance because you are maintaining what you're doing. So
yeah, it seems like the termination stage is maybe not entirely, not that I don't know anything about it. I have no idea. I am learning this along with the viewer or listener. Felicia's the expert. I have no clue what any of this stuff is, but I'm asking questions and learning as we all are together here from Felicia. So what are the ways that you help a client move forward, I guess, to move? Is termination really an end goal?
Not, I mean, it is and it isn't. So the whole idea with what termination really is that, you know, people aren't necessarily thinking about the behavior anymore. So I was actually talking about this a couple of days ago with somebody where it's like, you know, you get up in the morning and you brush your teeth maybe right away, or you eat something and then you brush your teeth, but you have a routine and you don't think about it. Like you don't think I'm putting the toothpaste on the toothbrush, or, you know, I'm flossing if you floss. Or
so
like,
it's automated.
Yes, it's automated. And so that's kind of the idea with where termination comes from, is that it's just a part of what you do. You don't think about it and you easily troubleshoot with stuff.
Okay, so I think termination is a rather unfortunate way of describing it.
Yes.
I think what might be a more useful moniker would be unconscious competence. Have you heard of the competence?
Yes.
That little square. So it's unconscious incompetence. You know what I mean? You've heard it from me.
Yeah.
It's another business thing. God, it always goes back to business for me. Go figure. I studied business. But yeah, unconscious competence is what you want with literally any skill that you're looking to build and create. You know, if you're playing music, you want to be able to have your fingers flow across the keys of the fretboard or whatever without having to think about, C chord, 3rd fret, G string, whatever. You know, you just want to be able to do it without thinking about it.
Yeah.
I guess that's what you're looking for in terms of termination. It's I guess another version of is completion.
Yeah, that's another kind of terminology. It's funny. I see termination way more, but completion, I was reading somewhere and I'm like, that sounds a little better. But you're not necessarily completed. It's not like you're done and you've checked it off. It's just and that, it's like a continuation, which is why people tend to just say maintenance and not termination.
Yeah, I like the word completion better there for me personally. So we are looking to progress a client from maintenance into completion, or I'm just going to unconscious competence. It's a much more
like
appropriate term for this. It's unfortunate that, we're looking for one word titles for each stage. I understand the simplicity of naming the stages what they're named, but the notion really I think is unconscious competence.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better. But one of the things that, like, with the maintenance and completion, termination, whatever you want to term it, one thing is, another example that I've had clients that, as they're talking to me about their changes is like, their shopping list. Before, they had to make a conscious effort to say, I need to put vegetables on there. I need to put fruit on there. I need to do this. And, and they have to kind of remind themselves in a way to make sure it's on there and make sure it's a part of their, meal plan for the week. And then they get to a point where it's just like, oh, what kind of fruit am I going to have this week? Oh, berries. And it's more have like an excitement, but they always have fruit on their shopping list. They always have vegetables. It's just what they do. They always, when they're making a meal, they're like, what would be my components? And they just start throwing things together, and they don't think like, okay, I need to find and like there's,
This is making a lot more sense to me now. I am learning about this in real time. So maintenance is where people take action and they keep taking the action and they maintain that level of performance with whatever it is, but they do need self-monitoring tools to maintain it. The end goal is to not need those tools anymore. The end goal is to sort of bake it into your progress, your process, and create habitual changes.
Yes.
To the point where you're not even thinking about it. You're just, you're just drinking enough water throughout the day. It's baked into your routine. You're just making healthy food. You always have it available because you have a routine with shopping or ordering food or whatever, where you always have good foods available. You have a routine that you don't even think about implementing. You no longer have to actively maintain it.
Yes.
It is unconsciously part of your day.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to make, is that it's really, the idea of like still having to think about it in the maintenance stage. So you're doing it and you've been doing it, but you still kind of have to like think and plan and be aware of things that can potentially throw you off track. While at the same time, when you move into that termination, completion, you're not thinking about it anymore. It's just a part of what you do. And it's not to say that in that termination that you wouldn't necessarily, eat a cookie or things like that. And that doesn't mean you've relapsed or lapsed in any way. It just could be a part of, I occasionally have cookies and then that's how it is. And you just, you continue with what you're doing and you don't think twice about it, where it's bringing you back into like a spiral of unhealthy eating, because you're at this stage where you're just like, this is my healthy lifestyle. And so, yeah.
So you don't want someone to stay in maintenance forever.
No.
You want it to be unconscious and part of just naturally what they do.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you do if a client happens to get stuck in maintenance where it never, or they have trouble making it an unconscious sort of automatic thing?
So some of the things that can happen where people kind of feel like they're getting stuck or kind of in a rut is boredom, to be honest. So I think I highlighted it before, but like most people abandon, healthy eating or exercise programs because they get bored. And so making it fun, making it exciting, but not too overwhelming. So we were just talking about recipes. So sometimes that can look like maybe trying one new recipe a week or one new food per week. So like it could be a different fruit or vegetable that they've never tried or they haven't tried in a while, or it could be a different cooking method. So I have a lot of clients who just kind of fall back on like, steaming vegetables. And so that might be bland. So it could be doing like a new seasoning or even a new dressing, but something that's like going to spruce it up a little bit to get them excited about it. And that can help with kind of moving people into this, hey, I can do it and I can make it fun and I can keep doing it.
Battered deep fried broccoli.
That could be another one. I guess.
You don't recommend that?
Not necessarily.
Battered and deep fried. Covered in salt. No?
Covered in salt. That's a lot.
Delicious.
Can you imagine
covered in chocolate.
I mean, I don't know. They do have like weirdly
saute, bake.
Yeah. Usually,
clearly, you're not going to recommend deep frying anything.
Although they do have chocolate.
Who would deep fry broccoli? Does anyone batter and deep fry? Leave a comment if you've ever battered and deep fried broccoli.
Yeah, or chocolate covered broccoli you mentioned. Although I'm pretty sure I saw chocolate covered Brussels sprouts, and I don't remember where. So
I
there's
don't think
that.
I would go
Okay,
for that. That's
moving
kind of
on.
gross. That sounds disgusting, actually. No offense if you deep fry your chocolate covered broccoli or whatever, but
Although what I would add about Brussels sprouts, just while we're on that topic real quick, is that for one, I hate them steamed. They're gross. Roasted, delicious. So that's one just thing to keep in mind, is that sometimes vegetables can taste way better in a different cooking method. So I've had a lot of clients where they are so used to eating like boiled vegetables when they were younger. And so they're like, I don't like vegetables. And then I'm like, have you tried roasting them or sauteing them? And,
although
lightly
steamed is probably best for bioavailability of the micronutrient content.
Yes, not boiled necessarily. That's
Steamed.
usually,
Lightly steamed.
lightly steamed.
Not boiled to where your broccoli turns brown.
Yes,
You don't
and is
want,
mush.
yeah, you want it to be bright and vibrant looking still. We're talking to dietitians. I think they probably already know this.
Probably.
Okay, so we talked a bit about what happens if a client stops making progress or gets stuck or they plateau. Anything else you'd like to add for that?
The only other thing I want to add, and actually before I add that, and it just made me think, we're talking to dietitians, but sometimes even I do this. I get so far removed from like the basics of things that, like we were just talking about steaming and, like sauteing and then like making food taste good. And sometimes it could be really easy as like a dietitian, if you've been doing it for so many years, like eating in a certain way, that it can be really hard to kind of see what it looks like back at those beginning stages and the excitement and all that. So I'm not saying that you can't connect with clients, but that's just something too, is just, I don't know, when we were just talking about Brussels sprouts and all that.
Yeah,
So,
no, sure. And as a dietitian, I imagine there's value in keeping the blade sharp yourself and putting yourself through some of the paces that you might your clients occasionally. So it might be valuable for you as the dietitian, no matter how long you've been cooking, no matter how long you've been in the termination or completion or unconscious competence stage yourself. Take on a new recipe, challenge yourself a little bit, just to kind of put yourself back on your heels a little bit, and put yourself back on your heels a little bit as expression too, But to put yourself in the shoes of your client potentially, and kind of help you empathize with your clients a little bit more.
And that's kind of the whole part of like the empathy aspect too, is being able to put yourself in their shoes, but not assume necessarily, that you know what they're thinking or feeling. But that's a lot of where we talked before about, asking questions, and seeing what will work for the client. And so you kind of unlock what they already know. So we've kind of, in a sense, come full circle talking about, unlocking what the client already knows in terms of you are partnering with them. So you're not telling them what to do, even at the maintenance stage. You're asking what's working well, what things might you want to tweak. And you could still give ideas at this stage, but it's done so after asking what they might have an idea about already. So
that's maintenance for you.
Yes.
All right. So termination or completion. What are the stages of this stage 6 in the Transtheoretical Model?
So at this stage, like we kind of mentioned, this is, again, not necessarily a recognized stage, but people are they're doing it. They're not thinking about it. They don't have temptation for maybe like an unhealthy behavior necessarily, with maybe someone who has reduced their added sugar content. It's not to say that they won't necessarily have sweets. They might have a threshold where they say, I'll have a sweet here and there, but I'm not going to make a big deal about it. And I don't have it every day. It's just when I feel like I want one. And they're in this stage where they can walk by a bowl of sweets and decide, I don't really want that. And not really think twice about it and, kind of harp on it the rest of the day, because they're in this stage of, less temptation, basically. And it does take, we kind of briefly mentioned this before about, how long it takes to create a habit. But I was reading, so they say it takes 21 days, and apparently no one really, I don't know, no one really knows where it comes from. And I was reading a bunch of things and people were like, where does this even come from? But temptation can actually continue for up to 3 years. And then, after that is typically when temptation for like an unhealthy behavior or like we mentioned, like smoking or inactivity, all that kind of stuff, kind of falls away, where again, it becomes just a part of what people do and they don't think about it.
3 years.
Yeah.
That is an intense amount of time.
Usually,
so if someone's in for a year or two, they're not out of the woods yet.
Yeah. And usually confidence like peaks at about a year, where someone's feeling really good, really confident and like keeping it going. And then still having temptation. So it's not to say at year 2 someone's going to necessarily relapse completely, but when they get to generally like a 3-year mark is when that
So
kind of tapers off.
so all right, this is slightly off topic, but it's kind of relevant. Alcoholism. If you're an alcoholic, they say you're an alcoholic for life. But if you're 3 years deep into sobriety, how do you still feel temptation? What's going on there? Does that have more to do with like personality and addictive tendencies?
Yeah, because there's a lot of other, and that's like in the DSM-5. I don't know if it's 6 now or not, but like it's the same with like eating disorders. Someone can be in, active recovery is more so the terminology that they would use there, that they still have, a condition, a mental health condition, and it's not going to go away. And it's still something that they need to maintain, because it can be very easy to kind of get overconfident sometimes, or not be aware of certain triggers that could potentially throw somebody into, a relapse, which could be 6 years out. And, that's where sometimes a lot of shame can come from with my clients that I work with, is that they, have hit a point where they're doing really well, and it might have been like a year, and it could have been even before seeing me, that they were like, everything was on track, I was doing really well, and then they have a major life change that kind of throws them for a loop. So maybe they had a baby, or maybe they, lost a significant other. And so, of course, those kinds of things can really throw somebody's life. And so, going back to old kind of coping mechanisms sometimes can be a temptation there. So, but that's
slightly off topic. Yeah, the stages of change, they apply generally, but, if someone has a mental health issue, this is not necessarily going to stick.
Yeah, I mean, this is still a good thing to kind of keep in mind, but the support aspect in that maintenance and termination is honestly really key to kind of helping someone continue in that. And it's, again, more kind of in a thought process of active recovery, where someone is still actively doing the things that they need to do to keep themselves, on a healthy eating plan, or keeping themselves sober, or stopping smoke, or, not smoking, or things like that. But if they set themselves up in a support system where they have people to rely on, like they're not hanging out with smokers necessarily, or limiting how much they might do that, or they have a buddy that if they are going to hang out with, a group of people that smoke, they have a friend that doesn't smoke, and they can kind of have that, support system, like those kinds of things. But they're forward thinking and actively thinking about those. So
okay, so I'll bring this back a little bit to what we're really talking about here, the TTM stages of change. So that kind of applies just for anyone, people in general. So if you're in the maintenance stage and you're looking to transition into termination or completion, but in your incompletion, say you're a year or two in, but you hang out with a group of friends, and all of a sudden there's a pizza party or whatever, or it's like the Super Bowl. You all good all year, you've been good, and then all of a sudden, pizza, wings, nachos, soda pop, beer, and then you go nuts and you're way off the rails. Is that kind of thing acceptable? Are you still in completion if that sort of thing happens?
Yeah, and that's where it depends. And I that's a good point to make, because that's what will determine if someone is actually in active maintenance or termination or whatever, is that if they can go and do that, and then the next day just go back to what they were doing, they usually that's kind of like, they don't think about it. They're not guilting themselves. They're like, I'm just going to go back to what I'm doing. And then that's how it is, versus where I have other clients where the relapse or lapse part happens, where they, experience a lot of guilt, and, they're like, I can't eat as much on Monday, and they start to kind of feel really bad. And then they're like, or it follows them into the week. So like, especially with desserts, or taking,
if there are leftovers.
Yeah, leftovers. And then it follows them into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And then they're just like off, for the whole week. And then there's, again, that mental aspect of like, guilt and negativity about everything and their progress. And then that can filter into like stopping exercise.
Man, the holiday season keeps you guys employed for a lifetime. That's like literally every November and December and January. It's built into modern society. At this point, it's built into the first world.
Yeah.
That's what happens every year, on top of flu season of all things.
Yeah. And it's funny because I have some clients, and again, this is kind of where it depends on what someone's end goal is in terms of what their optimal wellness looks like and what their wellness vision is. And that's going to be different for everybody. Because I have some clients who enter into the holidays and they're like, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to have cookies if I want.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to enjoy the time with my family. And they're not going to stress over it, because that's a huge piece of being in kind of this termination aspect or completion, is that they can eat what they want and make those choices and not attach guilt or shame or anything with it, it's hard.
So let me ask you, as a dietitian then, if you have a client who sort of does that, but it's somewhat cyclical with like the seasons, because this is what I used to do in college and my like early and mid 20s, you might remember this, where, the holidays, all bets are off. And for like summer vacation, anything goes. That was what I would say. Anything goes. But I would go through stages where it was like, if it was winter, I would try to put on weight. And if it was going into the spring, I would start to cut body fat, stuff like that. If someone has seasonal behaviors like that, where it seems like they're kind of all over the place, but it's sort of a planned thing, is as a dietitian, would you be okay with helping someone maintain that, or would you recommend them to go with a different approach?
It depends. It really depends on the client, to be honest. Like I work with a lot of clients who have diabetes and high cholesterol, and so they don't necessarily want to go off the rails during the holidays because their blood sugar goes all over the place. And it doesn't mean that they can't have cookies or anything like that. They just kind of have to be a little bit more mindful about planning when that happens in their portions, and so they're aware of how much they have. So they still allow themselves to, consume cookies or eat extra portions, but they're just more mindful of, exercise and what they eat that rest of the day, not to restrict themselves, but to still make sure that they're kind of maintaining their diabetes or their condition. So that's kind of one piece of it. And then there's the other piece of, I have clients where, they may go to a party and enjoy themselves, but they're kind of like hard and fast rule is I'm not going to take anything home. So they enjoy themselves, but they don't want it in the house because they know that is something that if it's there, they're going to eat it, and they don't want to. And if it's there, it might be just out of boredom and because it's there. But it allows them also to kind of have fun when they're at the party, to kind of go at it, in a sense. And then the other aspect is keeping up with things that you can. So, one really key point that I always talk about is what can you do during the holidays? And sometimes that's just, focusing on stress management and exercise and things like that. So it really does depend on the client, but we still try to keep like a semblance of some healthy habits, but it might not be, related to food. It could be, the exercise or even hydration. That's one that tends to tank during the holidays.
Slip away while you're too busy hydrating on eggnog and wine.
That's true.
And beer during the holidays. Gotta love it. All right, so if we're in completion, I like the word completion better.
I should probably just
say it. What do you do as the dietitian then? Like, what do you do for the client?
So at this point, the client, it's a part of their life, and in a way, they don't necessarily need me. But a few things that I do in this stage. One is to celebrate the client's success. So sometimes people move from one thing to the other, and without kind of celebrating the progress that they've made. And while it doesn't seem like, well, why do you want to celebrate everything? That's where people can kind of lose track of how much they've put in time and effort and made the changes. And so being able to like celebrate what they've done, not like with a party necessarily, but just,
pizza party.
what's worked well and, how that's been going. So at this stage, sometimes I have clients who they don't necessarily need me. And so they may kind of terminate services, which again sounds, terrible, but,
that's where termination comes
from.
That
is kind of where termination comes. So they, and it's, for my clients in particular, a lot of them stay on like
they may depart. They say goodbye.
Yes.
Termination of services. Jeez,
I know.
What are you, a robot?
Sorry. But they may they'll be on my email list. They still might do things, like in terms of, sign up for classes or stuff like that. But they're not necessarily actively seeing me. We might check in here and there, but they might, we might part ways, where they don't need to schedule sessions, and that's not a bad thing at all.
That's kind of the end goal, isn't it?
Yeah. But sometimes at this point, clients are normally when I have clients in one and again, everything's kind of overlapping together. I'll have clients who are kind of moving into maintenance and kind of completion with some things and then starting new goals. And so it's kind of flowing in a sense because
it oscillates.
Yeah, we're creating other things to focus on. So they've maybe the exercise part of it is going really well. It's something they're maintaining. And now they're focusing on adding in more vegetables, or maybe the cooking aspect is going well. And now they want to focus on their hydration. And so they're kind of filtering in other goals. And that's where I come in, is, helping to not overwhelm them. And, sometimes the overconfidence can come in where they're like, okay, I could do this, this, and this. And then that can kind of get somebody into this kind of overwhelming feeling. So being there to, again, how things are going to work well and setting smart goals and all that kind of stuff.
It's kind of like if you see your doctor because you have a health problem. Once the health problem is gone, you don't just forget about your doctor.
Yeah.
You're kind of a diet doctor.
Yeah, I mean, you're there if they need you. It's kind of like, and you might have like checkups, like how you would go in for maybe like an annual physical. Some people do that just to check in, see how things are going, touch base. But it could be a really short kind of appointment, or it could be a quick email check-in. And then again, they know that I'm there in the event that something does happen or something changes. And I think we kind of briefly highlighted this before, is that, sometimes people have things that happen where they have a new diagnosis, or, something happens in their life. Like I think we've been like getting pregnant, or, things like that, where they would want to return to, seeing a dietitian.
Your services become valuable again.
Exactly.
More so than ever before, I would imagine, in a situation like that.
Yeah.
Well, I would imagine also too, and maybe this is mildly unethical, but you could gently remind people that they are covered for 3 or 6 or whatever appointments per year on their plan, and it's something they're already paying for. They might as well get some more out of their healthcare coverage if that's what they're doing with you, if they're covered through insurance. I don't know if that's unethical or not, to remind them that it's not going to cost anything to them.
No, it's not unethical to let people know of their benefits. And it is something that I do, is just, remind them that, what their insurance covers, and to leave it open. So, what would be unethical for me to say that and then say, well, you really should just use your visits and schedule with me, and then like kind of holding them captive, that would be unethical. So being able to say like, hey, you have the visits if you want to do a check-in and touch base, and, if something comes up, like I kind of put it on them to say, here's some moments where you might want to come back to the practice, or might want to schedule something, or if you just want to check in, see how things are going, maybe share some of the success you've had, to again kind of keep the focus on their progress and how well they've been doing, and celebrate that can sometimes be a part of the sessions, where it's not me actively doing much necessarily, but just kind of hearing the client out. That can absolutely be a piece to kind of continuing with things. But
yeah, so if a client is on the cusp of completion and they are getting to a point where they probably will no longer be needing your services, it could be wise to tactfully discuss with them, leaving an open-ended thread for possibly coming back in for a checkup, given that they are, especially if they are using insurance, that they're already covered for it anyway. If it's valuable to them to just check in, that you are available for that, and that you're willing to do that.
Yeah.
It might even seem to, I imagine maybe some clients perceive that that's a waste of your time.
Yeah. And that is actually a key thing to note, is that, my view is always, I want them to be aware, that I'm here, and I want them to be aware of what their insurance covers, and to use it if they, are able to and want to, but also I want the time to be valuable. So I don't want them to see me just to see me and check a box off, because usually those sessions are like, okay, how are things, and then you start talking about things that aren't nutrition related, which is not really the point of what the coverage is for. And so that's where I kind of ask people, if I get to this point where, they might be feeling like, well, I should just keep seeing her because she'll, get paid for this, and, doesn't hurt me. But, at the same time, the appointments aren't productive, and they're not helpful for the client in the sense, for nutrition or any kind of wellness. So I'll say, what do you think about, continuing? You think that these are still helpful, or what are your thoughts? And kind of put it to the client and see what they think.
So for you,
yeah,
for you personally, you are in a situation where you have a pretty robust client load and a full-time teaching position.
Yeah.
There are other dietitians who are nowhere near that. Maybe
Yeah.
they have 3 or 5 or 10 clients. For them, there may be more value in trying to make these completion visits, appointments, sessions more valuable to the client. So what are some ways that a dietitian could make these appointments with a client who's in completion more valuable?
So one, asking them what else they'd like to work on. So they may have completed one thing, but they might not have focused on other areas. And that's where we mentioned the wellness wheel, but that's actually where those kinds of resources can be helpful because it can spur conversation about other aspects of wellness that would be under your scope of practice, but maybe not ones the client was thinking about. So opening the door for more conversations, absolutely. If again, it's just really not needed for a session, that's where you could say, what do you think about checking in every 6 months or a year? And again, leaving it up to them because, all in all, you don't want to pressure them into doing one thing or the other, because then that also kind of damages the rapport and the trust that you have with them, that they're like, well, she's just trying to get a paycheck. It doesn't look good. So, and it's also unethical.
You don't want that. You don't want that at all.
Being able to kind of leave it open, because if you leave somebody in a place where they decide you've given them options, here's what we could continue doing, or here's options, but you're welcome obviously to do whatever, they are more likely to return to you. Because I've had clients where we got to a point where, they didn't necessarily need my services. They weren't really interested in kind of checking in that aspect. They were just like, no, I'll reach out to you if I need to. But then they sent other people to me, and then they came back later. So that's also an opportunity as well.
Yeah, of course, word of mouth and referrals are a big way that a lot of people get clients across any kind of business, especially when it's like a one-person show, a private practice such as yours. But I think it's also valuable, a lot of people seeing a dietitian that get to a point where they're good with their diet, there may be value in sort of illuminating what else is within the scope of practice for a dietitian, what else you could offer to them. I think pairing that with the open-ended, check in whenever you want, is probably valuable. I think maybe that newer dietitians might not be fully taking advantage of their full range of scope. Is that your impression at all?
Yeah, or I think sometimes people focus so heavily on food, which is, obviously a huge part of what we do, but, the other aspects of wellness, which are underneath the scope. And then we did mention exercise, and the scope of practice is something we will cover in a future podcast, probably 2 episodes later or so. But, the exercise part and, again, designing a program might be out of the scope, but unless you have other credentials, but talking about fitness and movement and, even again, client generated goals. So you not necessarily saying you need to go out and, run for 30 minutes and do 10-minute push-up and designing this whole workout for them, but saying, what do you think about, a workout plan? What were you kind of thinking of? And you put it in their hands to decide what they're going to do, but you're kind of spurring the conversation and facilitating that conversation is a huge part of where you can come in. So,
okay. So a client, if they're in completion or termination, you know that they're unconsciously competent with their habits and with healthy lifestyle, the changes they made that they took action with and they were maintaining for a long period of time are now just something they do as part of their life. At this point, as a dietitian, when you're seeing them, it's more about, okay, what else can we do? What else can I help you with? This and that are within my scope of practice. If you'd like to look at these other things on the wellness wheel.
Yes.
But it's also a good idea to leave it open for them to maybe stop seeing you. And, maybe that completes your services with them as well. That's sort of a good idea to be tactful with. And then potentially they come back to you once a year, twice a year for life. Or maybe they refer other clients to you. But is that a fair summation of the completion stage 6?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll highlight too is that if you ask the question, what else would you like to work on? They might be like, I don't know, you tell me. So that's where having something like a wellness wheel, or there's a bunch of other wellness inventory is another one. It's kind of similar, but having those kinds of resources to say, well, I have a resource that talks about wellness as a whole, and here's where we are areas that we could talk about. Having that as kind of a little feeder conversation can be really helpful, because it might catch you off guard. Because I've had that when I first started, where someone's like, well, you tell me what we should do next. And I was like, I don't know. What do you think?
That's not very valuable then.
No, yeah. Being able to kind of facilitate the conversation, ask them first, but if they're not sure, or they're not sure where you can help specifically, being able to say, here's what other services I offer, or here's, some ideas of other topics, or very first session that I have with clients, we talk about a lot of topics and I jot those down. And so if we get to a point at the end, I'll sometimes revisit and say, well, I know the first session that we had a while ago, you mentioned that it would be helpful to talk about hydration. So is that something you'd still like to talk about more? We can,
Oh man, we got to do a general tips thing like we need to do one podcast where it's like general tips, because detailed note taking, like that's something you do, but not a lot of people really do that. We do probably have some videos and stuff like that already.
Yeah,
if we do, I'll link them.
Yeah.
So that's completion. Do you want to round out all 6 stages? Just briefly touch on each of the 6 stages, just a little synopsis for each.
Yeah. So again, stages of change, 5 or 6 stages.
So this is the Transtheoretical Model.
Transtheoretical.
That models the stages of change that clients or anyone goes through with a variety of different disciplines.
Yes. And so this is, again, explaining how people change in the behavior and kind of where they are, in a sense, mentally when they're in these different stages. And then that also allows you to better help them as, the dietitian or, clinician. But first stage, pre-contemplation. So not thinking about change, not ready for change, may not even be aware that they need to change. They move into this contemplation where they're thinking about maybe changing, but they're not making a change in, the near future. And so they have pros and cons. They're kind of sitting on the fence. They're like, I don't know, maybe I should, but maybe I shouldn't. And then they move into the preparation stage where they are thinking about the change and they're kind of preparing to prepare. They're preparing to make the change. And maybe
they're getting ready. They're gearing up.
Yeah, they're gearing up, and they have maybe they're going to start the change in the next 30 days, and they may be taking small steps at this point too. So they've already started to get a gym membership or get their gym clothes, or maybe started to walk, but they're not kind of in this action just yet consistently. So action would be the next stage, and that's where someone is doing what they had said. So maybe they're walking 3 days a week, and they're, starting to do that consistently. They may start to tweak goals there, and then they move into maintenance where they've been actively doing whatever their changes for the last 6 months, and then completion, or what did you say?
Oh, unconscious competence?
Yes, unconscious competence or termination. At this stage, they are not even thinking about it anymore. It's just a part of what they do on a daily basis.
I'm going to start a petition to change this term to completion for stage 6. Termination that's like a word used for many, many negative. Like if you get fired, that's termination. I don't know.
I didn't think about that.
It has such a negative connotation to it. But we should probably just call it completion forever.
Completion.
Everyone forever. If you're a dietitian listening to this and you are using these stages of change, let's go with completion. Huh? What do you say? All right. I think that probably about wraps it up. Thanks for joining us for the stages 5 and 6 of the Transtheoretical Model, an excellent model for taking any type of client through any service, in my opinion. Excellent stuff. This is a very concise and well planned out theory, a model, if you will. What do we want to cap off with? What's next? What do we get into next? This has been a wild ride here for the Transtheoretical Model. What's next on the docket?
So actually next, already planned, I'm very excited. And we're going to talk about why I got into private practice and kind of the first things that I did to kind of prepare myself, and just kind of that beginning stage. And then that'll lead to some future podcasts about private practice more specifically. But
that's exciting stuff.
Yeah.
How you prepared to take the leap.
Yes.
I remember.
I'm excited about that.
All right. Well, I guess that'll do it for us here. Thanks so much for being with us today for the stages 5 and 6 of the Transtheoretical Model. I've been your producer, Adam. With me, of course, the expert, the star of the show, Felicia Peraza, PerazaNutrition.com, Instagram, Facebook, at Peraza Nutrition on Instagram, and My Already Journey as well.
Yep, at My Already Journey.
They do both have 2 separate Facebook pages.
Yes.
Check in. By all means, follow, all that good stuff. Felicia's very active on all those platforms, and she provides some, in my opinion, excellent content. That'll do it for us here. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.